Okay, everybody. Welcome back to the plenary. I hope you enjoyed this first coffee break you had. And I don't see any wet people, so nobody fell into the pool. That's very good. Keep it like that. We now want to continue. In the morning, we've heard a lot about the EU Youth Dialogue in general, about what this cycle is going to be, and actually right now we want to shift the focus a little bit and start our discussions regarding social inclusion in Europe. So we are going to have a panel discussion to tackle the questions: where has the EU made progress in the field of inclusion in the past few years, yet where do challenges remain? And also we want to talk about how the EU Youth Dialogue can actually contribute to the political discussion in the field of inclusion, which we had. So I named this title, What We Need to Know to Support the Inclusion of Young People in Society. So the panel is meant as an inspirational spark for the discussions you have later on. And we have a few very awesome guests, which I will introduce to you in just about a second. So again, I want to encourage you to listen closely, remember some of the aspects that will be highlighted in this panel, and bring them to your working group discussions later on. Now to get to our panel and to our lovely panelists, I would like to introduce you who is with me on stage. And first of all, I would like to start with you, Alex. We have Alex Quinn here, who is a policy officer for social and economic inclusion at the European Youth Forum. And your work focuses mainly on the fair working conditions of young people, as well as access to social protection and also mental health. It's great to have you here as one of our experts. Also, also with us is Nadia Garrido. Nadia, you have been Regional Social Program and Advocacy Director for Latin America and the Caribbean for the SOS Children's Villages International. You've been doing that for more than 11 years, actually.
Yes.
And currently, you are leading the advocacy area of SOS Children Villages in Spain, so your focus is primarily on young people with fewer opportunities. It's also great to have you here with us.
Thank you.
As a representative of the European Commission, we have you, Karen van der Wey, with us. Karen is Deputy Head of the Unit B3, Solidarity and Volunteering, with the DG EUYC at the European Commission. And this unit is responsible for the management of the Erasmus Plus programs, as well as the European Solidarity Corps. And you're also in charge of EU youth policy and the European youth strategy. So you're very well connected to this event, actually, and to the discussions which we will have. Also, thank you for joining us. I would say let's not waste any more time, but directly jump into the discussions. And Alex, I would like to start with you to kind of set the ground for this discussion. Yeah. So my first question would be, what are right now the most common and pressing barriers when we look at young people across European member states? What challenges do they mainly face when it comes to social inclusion?
Yeah. First of all, how's it going, everybody? Thanks for having me here. It's I'll try my best to contribute as best I can. So I think before starting, a good way, it's good to say that young people are not a homogenous group, and there's obviously national complexities, and particular young people face particular challenges that might not resonate with other groups of young people. But having said that, there definitely is trends across EU countries that you could say that young people are facing at the moment as a group. And I think it's important to say also that this term inclusion, which is the main theme of this conference, is itself a kind of contested term. And I think that it's contested in a sense that it has different interpretations across different countries across the EU, and also within different policy circles. And I think that a good approach to inclusion is like a more radical approach, where it would be that it's not just about young people being included in society, but it's also about questioning the kind of systematic barriers that exclude young people in the first place. So it's not just about, I think I have a good quote here that kind of like sums it up, how inclusion could be kind of approached. So it says, inclusion is not bringing people into what already exists. It's about creating a new space that is better for everybody. And I think a lot of the time when we approach inclusion, it's just about We need to get young people involved when we don't question the actual systemic barriers behind why they're excluded in the first place. So I think it's different in terms of inclusion and the main barriers young people are facing at the moment. I think it's difficult for me to sit here and give an overly positive image of how it is to be young at the moment across the EU. I have a few, I've kind of put a few statistics together, and it kind of gives like a bit of a portrait of what it's like at the moment. So 1 in 3 young people are at risk of poverty or social exclusion, and that's actually...
Could you just slow down a little bit?
I can slow down, okay. And you can put your hand up if I say a word too fast. So 1 in 3 young people at the moment are at risk of poverty or social exclusion, and that's a statistic that has not changed much in the last 10 years, and if anything, it's got worse. 46% of young people are currently working on a precarious contract at work that doesn't guarantee like a steady amount of hours and doesn't guarantee a steady income. So, and that kind of precarious nature of the work kind of seeps into the rest of their life as well. 1 in 2 young people at the moment in the EU report an unmet need for mental health support. So that means right now at the moment that there's a huge issue with mental health. It's kind of endemic, you could say, but there's not the support there to be able to avail of like a decent kind of level of support. And that has huge repercussions long term for young people. If they experience mental health issues at this age, there's the likelihood of them experiencing mental health issues later down the road are also increased. And then at the same time, which I suppose is a kind of double burden for young people at the moment, is that they face some of the most precarious contracts in the world of work. They don't have access to mental health support when it's needed. Poverty and social exclusion. At the same time, their access to social protection and social welfare is also really compromised. And I think if you look at any sort of social benefit, whether it be housing assistance, minimum income, job seekers allowance, young people face a lot of challenges in accessing this, and often when they do access it, the amount that they get in return is reduced compared to older age groups. And I can just say for Ireland, I see with the Irish people here that we have job seekers allowance, which is a minimum income for young people. But if you're under the age of 25, the maximum you can avail of is half the amount if you're over 25. And for an arbitrary reason that you're just younger than someone, like there's no other reason other than you're a young person there. So it's an arbitrary kind of rule, and that's something that's across a lot of member states where young people accessing social protection is quite difficult. And I think, so if you take these examples as a kind of like a framework of trying to understand what it's like to be young in the EU at the moment, and in terms of inclusion, I think you can say it's kind of marked by uncertainty, insecurity, and a kind of sense of precarious. And I'm not saying it's not all bad. I'm like doom and gloom up here, but it's good to
talk about the good things.
It's good not to shy away from the reality the way it is at the moment. I think there's the risk of this at the moment is that it's so ubiquitous that it's almost becoming hyper normal for young people to be in a precarious situation. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't have to be that way. There's a different way. And I think that the hope of this sort of conference is that it's about questioning that kind of inevitability that comes with a lot of discourse on being young. I think it was mentioned in one of the first talks we had as well, that in Spain it's a similar situation, and it's kind of presented that that's just part of being young. Well, it doesn't have to be part of being young. Being young can also be, young people can also be afforded a sense of stability and certainty around whether it be work or social protection or housing. So
and
it's
that's
about
the goal
that
which we actually work towards too.
Exactly so.
Just to add another component to that, because young people in itself as a group are vulnerable, as you just said, they face several barriers in society, but young people with fewer opportunities, they have a special intersectional perspective actually added to that, so they don't just face discrimination, for instance, because they are young, but they have other factors that influence that as well. So I would like to come to you, Nadia, to ask you, what are the unique challenges that young people, especially with fewer opportunities, face in the European, but also maybe on the national context, especially from your work in the field of advocacy?
Well, thank you. First of all, thank you for put in the center the youth of the most vulnerable groups in the center of the discussion. Also, thank you on behalf of SOS Children's Villages to put also especially the youth that have lived in alternative care or are out of care. I think that it's important to bring different perspectives and to have this dialogue and exchange with all of you. Also, I would like to talk about youth that are living in difficult situations, that are in the margins of the inclusion. They are outside of this inclusion. And for this, I think that we need to talk about different identities, the diversity of this group. This is not only one group. It's a group with a lot of identities, a lot of diversities. And I think that we can name we can name what they are facing, because I think it's important to identify that they are facing poverty, they are facing unemployment, different type of violence, mental health issues, suicide, anxiety, depression. They faced a war recently, yeah? They are facing the war. They are in situation of disabilities. They are facing climate change, gender discrimination. They are caregivers. They are in situation of migration. They face problems of housing, education, no access to education, to quality education, racism. They live in rural areas. They are at the margins. So I am really happy that we set up this dialogue, identify the diversity of these vulnerable groups, and take it seriously for future proposals, for policy proposals, involving them, yeah, to find how to tackle the barriers, how to come to common solutions around Europe. One thing that for me is also important is how they feel, because I have the opportunity to talk with many of them in Spain, but also in Europe, and also before in Latin America and the Caribbean. They feel the stigma. They feel loneliness. They feel prejudices. The absence of network, especially for those that have lost their families. They feel that they fault. And one important thing, they don't feel that they are autonomous, independent. So we need to think on all those things and reflect during these days, reflect especially in this vulnerable group, and then think on the measures, think to act. I think it's really important.
Now, Karen, coming towards you, if you hear about these challenges for young people in general, but then of course also especially for young people with fewer opportunities, who are also very difficult, I would assume, for the Commission with the EU youth programs to actually reach, what strategies does the European Commission have in place to kind of working on solutions for these identified gaps, especially if you look at the EU youth programs? Can you give us an insight?
So as was raised by Nadja and also Alex, the young people currently, they are confronted with a lot of challenges, and we notice that this affects in particular the vulnerable people, so the young people with fewer opportunities, those young people that are at disadvantage compared to their peers because they face several obstacles, whether these obstacles are economic or geographical or social. And so in the European Union, inclusion and equality has always been important. So the aim is that no one should feel left behind. And particularly in recent years, there was quite a lot of strategies that were adopted under President von der Leyen since 2020. So you have the gender equality strategy, you have the framework, Roma framework on equality and inclusion, you have the framework for the rights of people with disabilities, you have the anti-racism action plan, the anti-Semitism action plan, so a lot. So these strategies, action plan kind of provide a roadmap, an action plan to make a kind of more inclusive, fairer society. And here the youth programs and the youth strategy play a role. So in the European Union youth strategy, we also see the importance of inclusion. And then we notice in the youth programs, so what we call the programs for youth is the European Solidarity Corps and Erasmus+. I don't know whether, I suppose many of you or some of you have participated in actions under Erasmus+ or the Corps. So the Erasmus Plus, it's more for the training, education, sport and youth, and then the core, the European Solidarity Core, is the program on volunteering, so to provide young people with a volunteer experience.
Can we actually do a quick survey, just to have an image also in the room, who has previously participated in an Erasmus Plus program or in a European Solidarity Corps? Can you raise your hand? That's quite a lot. Wow. Okay, good. So everybody knows,
Yes.
most people know what we're talking about. Okay.
So, as you know, the main purpose of these programs is to develop exactly the skills of young people and to kind of skills or competences that they can use for their future professional and personal life. And it focuses a lot on engagement, and particularly in the youth chapter, you have the youth participation to create active and engaged citizens. But what is quite important, because I see you have quite a knowledge on the programs, is that in recent years there's a greater focus on inclusion. So as you know, a few years ago the programs adopted a kind of inclusion and diversity strategy with a kind of framework of inclusion measures. So the aim is that the opportunities offered by the program should benefit everyone, so including young people with few opportunities, because we see that they in fact gain the most out of these mobility experiences abroad. And so there are several measures that have now been implemented. First, there's more support to those young people with few opportunities, because we see they don't participate in these actions because there are financial barriers, linguistic barriers, psychological barriers. And so what is done now is that there's more financial support. There's an offering of language courses, and also there's this mentoring. So this mentoring plays more and more a role in the programs, that they're on a track with more support and mentoring. The same for organizations working with young people with few opportunities. We noticed what was missing was the training opportunities, the networking. So there's more possibilities of exchange, and also there's more financial support and encouraging these organizations to reach out to young people with fewer opportunities and to involve them in the projects. And then in the new programs, we set up more kind of easy learning formats. So we notice, it's better to propose short-term mobility, because people from vulnerable backgrounds, they don't feel at ease to go on a long-term mobility. So it's a kind of entry point to say we offer kind of 2 weeks short-term mobility. The same, there's group mobility. So for those who don't want to embark on their own, they can go in group. And there's also a bit more of in-country activities. Like in the core, we have the solidarity projects, so it's community-based. And then the focus is more on communication. So we focus a lot on creating user-friendly material, the use of visuals, also on the European Youth Portal, to kind of write in simple language, available in different languages. And we work a lot with the multipliers, so with Eurodesks or the European Youth Forum or the Erasmus Student Network, to pass on the message, so to reach out to young people with fewer opportunities. The same for the selection of projects. Now there's a criteria also on inclusion, so that projects who focus on inclusions, they will be easier awarded, so this is encouraged. Of course, we have the inclusion priority and also the plans at national level. So to address the national complexities, we ask every national agencies to set up plans at national level to address, to be very close to the needs of the stakeholders, the young people at national level.
Now, to shift the focus a little bit, and actually I believe, especially for the discussions which you will have in the working groups, it is quite necessary to know what actions are already being taken, where can we actually find or build bridges to the programs, to the statements, to the papers, to the mechanisms which the European Commission is already putting in place, which you highlighted, especially also in the beginning. Still, I believe also the Commission is aware of the gaps that have been identified by several stakeholders. So can you also share with us maybe some insights of data you as Commission have been collected in terms of identifying gaps, and where would you like to take actions to improve on these challenges? Where do challenges persist?
But I think for us, first, I will follow the words of our Vice President Síguenos. We need to de-Brusselize Europe and bring Europe closer to its communities and regions. So it's this outreach that is very important. But I think from our side, it's a bit too early to come with kind of exact data, because as you know, the programs were quite late adopted because of the COVID-19 pandemic, and then also it took a while to resume mobility. So we only start to get data, or we will start to get data in the next years, and we hope as well to get more insights through these national plans that are set up on inclusion and diversity at national level. And so now also in every national agency we have inclusion and diversity officer, so to kind of build knowledge more at national level in terms of participation and access and barriers. So that we will get back these insights. We work with the research centers, the Saltos on inclusion, so there's one for training education and one for youth. And I know the Salto for inclusion for youth is currently looking into this, the implementation, the effectiveness of the inclusion and diversity strategy, and then how far we reached our objectives. And we have currently the midterm evaluation exercise. So it looks into the previous programming period and the current one to see how far are we in achieving our objectives. And there are public consultations, so there's one for Erasmus Plus and the one for the core will soon be launched, with questions exactly addressing the inclusion. So to say how inclusive are our programs. We also added new indicators in the monitoring evaluation framework to kind of see to complement the existing indicators in the legal base, to say, okay, to find out more, what is the share of projects addressing inclusion, what is the awareness of participants on inclusion, if they participate in a youth exchange that is linked with inclusion. For the core, the same is to see, again, what is the share of participants with young people with fewer opportunities. We have a few data. We know in the European Solidarity Corps that I think 35% of people participating are young people with few opportunities in our programs. We don't have the data yet for Erasmus Plus, but I mean, in the last programming period, it was 39% for youth action. So we hope as well to see a gradual increase over the next years.
So what we can see, we've talked now about the challenges in the beginning, and you've highlighted a bit the work of the Commission. We know that several stakeholders play a crucial role in contributing to better social inclusion. Civil society is a relevant part to that. NGOs, INGYOs, so international non-governmental youth organizations, are part of that. And what we can do is, for instance, look at the best practices that they have, the great work that they are doing, and kind of transfer knowledge from there. So Nadia, I would like to ask you, do you have some specific examples of successful initiatives or strategies, for instance, from Spain, but maybe even from Latin America, to also shift the focus a little bit on how youth inclusion can actively be promoted, which can also, again, inspire the conversations of the delegates?
Yes, I think that in the case of Spain, we recently have the minimum vital income, which is a support, a very important support for the youth that are living in vulnerable conditions. Also, I think that the financial support is critical, and we need to provide to the youth this type of support. I think that also we have the national strategy of youth. It's something that we need to be more profound, and now we have this strategy, so we need to implement it. We need also to invest a lot to really reach this strategy. Also, we have the mental health strategy. I think that it is very important also to mention here in Spain. And also, I really believe that the spaces of participation of youth, where the youth can, since the beginning of the design of a public policy, be part, are also something to highlight. Other things that I think is also very important are the scholarships. Some of the vulnerable groups cannot access, so it's something that they need to access, for example, for the university. And we have some scholarship. What we need to work also in Spain is to have the same responses, or at least an average of responses in the regions, in the different regions that we have in Spain. And in the case of SOS Spain, I would like also to highlight one program that we are implementing, and I think that can be inspiring also for other countries, and the project was called Prepare for Living Care. It was founded by the European Union, but now SOS is doing this since the beginning in Spain, and it's a very good practice because we support youth that lived in alternative care more of the majority of the age. We have in the European countries the problem that in some European countries the support of the youth that live in alternative care is until 18. So if you don't change this, all the support, all the networks that they are already established with this youth is broken once they became the majority of age. So I think that is something that we need also to take this best practice, also support the youth more than 18 years old. Otherwise, if you don't understand about human rights, because this is a human right, you have to understand that you are putting a financial resource until 18, and then the financial resource is not there. The youth cannot become independent and be included in the society.
Mm-hmm. So again, also in the dialogue, we will have moments where we talk about best practices to look around, because I think that's also the beauty of the European Union, but of course also about cross-sectoral collaboration to learn from others, to learn from best practices. But of course, still, yes, we know a lot of work still needs to be done. So Alex, I would like to ask you, what are the immediate actions that really need to be taken right now, especially also from a European perspective, where different stakeholders can and should collaborate and support the promotion of youth inclusion? What would you or the YFJ ask in terms of actions?
Yeah, so I think in terms of immediate actions, to go back to what I said before, as in sometimes the issues that young people face are kind of positioned as some sort of inevitable part of growing up. So I think really any immediate actions need to kind of guarantee, should be trying to guarantee young people a level of security and stability from which then they can engage in democratic processes. Because to engage in democratic processes, be included in democratic processes, you also need to be able to not be worried about how I'm going to put food on the table, how I'm going to meet my housing needs. If that's taken care of, I really think that people will then be in a headspace, a position to then get involved in democratic processes. And but I think, so on a policy level, I do a lot of work on a policy level and for social and economic inclusion. And I think you can't look on a national, like in terms of like what national governments can do, national authorities, you can't look beyond stuff like caps on rent, an increase in the social housing stock, which across the EU has kind of been on the downward spiral for the last 20 years. And you can't look beyond taking away age-based discrimination when young people are trying to access social protection, which is there arbitrarily. You can't look beyond, I think also there's a big emphasis on unemployment for young people, and it's only part of the story, where there's also underemployment and malemployment. And a lot of that stems from that the available work that is there is not distributed fairly for young people. Some people have too much work, and then young people can only get 2 days a week, where if the available work was distributed fairly, it could it'd be beneficial for young people. So I think there are immediate actions that can be taken on a kind of national government level to improve the material conditions of young people, and then they can get involved in democratic process. I think civil society has a huge role to play to kind of not just always be reactive to certain inequalities and issues, but also to try to be proactive and put stuff on the agenda for young people. So it has that role in terms of trying to shape the discourse, which I think is an immediate action that civil society does already. I think that another big role for civil society is to ensure that there's a fair representation of young people at all levels of the policy kind of spectrum of how policy is made, and not just, like I think it's been mentioned a good few times, but not just be consulted on an already determined set of parameters, but to kind of be there from the very start to co-create something together, whether it be around social protection. I think young people probably know a lot more than a lot of policymakers on what the inequalities are, and same for housing. So if they're there from the very start and not just at a later stage to be consulted about an already given policy, I think that would have huge benefits for the outcome of the policy.
And this quite well also connects to the role of the EU Youth Dialogue as a platform where these discussions can actually take place. So would you say can this conference, but also the EU Youth Dialogue in general, play a more proactive role in supporting these discussions? How can the dialogue be even more enhanced?
I think that so there's going to be a lot of great things said at this dialogue and a lot of great ideas, and I think that to give these ideas more weight, there needs to be a solid outcome that young people can actually see where the benefit is going to be. So it can't be just put up on a shelf and, okay, we have these ideas. It needs to be actually utilised, and I think that gives a lot of credibility to a youth dialogue when it's not just it's a consultation and there's great ideas coming, but actually when you're able to see a difference. Because there needs to be a difference. The poverty rate for young people has been the same for the last 10, 15 years. And consultations have happened the whole way through that. And so I think if a consultation and a youth dialogue is going to have a real added benefit, it's going to be that there's going to be a concrete outcome at the end where real change can be brought from.
And it's great that you actually emphasize the role of transparency and also giving feedback, communicating what's happening here. You're all here with a mandate. You are delegates, so you're here to represent your member states, youth from your member states. Maybe you're an INGO and you have an even bigger community you're representing. And I mentioned that before in the conference. The dialogue is not just taking place here in the conference and in this plenary and in those walls, but what we need to do on all levels, going from the Commission, member states, to each individual who's taking part in the dialogue, is to spread the news, is to have discussions with people, but to also report back. So when the conference report, for instance, comes out, and we will hear more about that just after the panel by Andras, one of the researchers, we need you to take that report and work with it on all levels. So Karen, I would like to ask you the same question, actually. How would you say the EU Youth Dialogue can play a more proactive role? How can it be supported to have a better and bigger impact in the discussions?
Well, as you know, for the Commission, the democratic process is very important. So because, of course, the policies at European level need to match with the hopes and the views of the citizens, so there need to be mechanisms in place so that citizens can make their voices heard and that we can listen back to the citizens. So this was, for example, the purpose of the Conference on the Future of Europe. We have now the citizens panels that look into certain initiatives happening at policy level, like for the European Learning Mobility Framework. And so we have the EU Youth Dialogue, which is the instrument of youth participation and involving youth. How can we further, what was the question again?
How can the Youth Dialogue play a more proactive role? Like what needs to be implemented or supported in order that we can work even more proactively towards Youth Goal number 3?
Yeah, I think here, first, we saw the data of a recent study that came out from the Youth Partnership, where we noticed that the EU Youth Dialogue is already very inclusive, that almost 50% of the young people come from disadvantaged backgrounds. But here, how to make the dialogue is, I think it's a joint effort of all partners involved, whether it's the Commission, the national authorities, the national working groups, the young people, the stakeholders. And for the Commission, we see also a role at national level, so the national working groups, because they're very close to these national complexities, to the needs of young people at national level, to engage with young people with fewer opportunities. So there's a key role for them. And there's, of course, quite some toolkits that can help to kind of further improve or mobilize young people in participating in these discussions. At European level, we have our EU Youth Coordinator, and so Biljana, she's kind of managing the youth network. So we come together with quite Commission departments across different policy areas where we discuss issues, and it can be on topics like on inclusion. It can be a topic that we exchange information, what is done in the different policies, so that we kind of map also what is done in different policies and programs, initiatives. And so one of the what the youth network can also do is we can discuss the recommendations that will happen in the context of the EU Youth Dialogue. We can also bring this forward to other Commission departments, so that this is also spread across the Commission.
Yeah, great. To move forward to my final question to all three of you, actually, for the panel. The whole purpose of this panel was to kind of get inspirations, insights from your areas of work for the working groups. So what tips would you give the delegates when they later join their working groups, dive into the discussion? How can and should they focus their discussion to really create impactful and meaningful ideas that fit the current political situation in Europe? What would be your tip for them? Nadia, would you like to start?
Okay, yes. Well, I think that, as I mentioned it before, if we talk about the diversity and the different identities of these specific vulnerable groups, we need to make the effort to think in specific measures, tailored responses for this group of youth, this specific group of youth. I also think that if we say that no one has to leave behind, this means that we need to shift the attitude that we have in the society, to increase the tolerance, to increase the acceptance. We need to improve the sense of belonging for the youth. So I think that we need to focus on, think on this, on what we already discussed, and think in the diversity, and also think in tailored responses for them.
Alex, what would you like to add to that?
I'm still trying to have a few ideas, but I think it's unacceptable that in 2023, 1 in 3 or 1 in 4 young people are at risk of poverty and social inclusion. And I think that didn't happen by osmosis. It's not like some magic wand and that's just the way it is. It happened by political choices and lack of incentives to kind of ameliorate that. So I think it'd be great to direct a bit of attention towards that. And maybe as well, it could be also representing it's people that maybe not be here as well, that are experiencing poverty as well. So I think it's a good way to direct the attention.
Thank you very much. And last but not least, Karen, what tip would you like to give the delegates for the working groups?
I think, okay, we're in the first phase of the EU dialogue, so it's a consultation phase, so any recommendations or ideas are welcome. But I think for us, it's very important to get a bit more information on the outreach and the barriers for young people with fewer opportunities, because as I mentioned, we've put all these measures in place, and still we don't manage to reach out to all young people. So the question is it still a lack of financial support? Are they not interested in the program actions, or is it a lack of information, that the information still doesn't pass through to the right target groups? So that's very important for us to know in order to improve a bit our policies and our programs. And also what I would like to say as well is that not to end this discussion here in this group, but also to kind of actively participate in the consultations that are happening at EU level, because with every action plan or every new policy initiative, the Commission organizes a lot of public consultations, and we would like encourage young people to participate and is kind of to view their opinions, to raise their voice, particularly now for the Erasmus Plus, the midterm evaluation. I think it would be very appreciated if we get more input from the young people. And all these publications are, of course, part of the Have Your Say portal, so I think this can also then, kind of further enrich the discussions.
Okay, great. I hope now you know what you need to do later on, and that you will take these tips into consideration. And I would like to thank you for joining us as experts and for shedding some light on the current state of the art in the field of inclusion in Europe. Thank you very much to all three of you. Thank you. Okay. We will have some brief moment of transitioning from this panel to the next discussions. And I would like to encourage you to take notes and to remember the aspects that have been highlighted in this discussion later on. We will have different guiding questions. We have the working group facilitators who will lead you through a set of methodologies that will facilitate the dialogue. But in order to get to know more what exactly you will be discussing, what objectives we are working towards in the conference, but also in the overall cycle, I would now like to introduce one of the European youth researchers to you who's going to shed some light on the questions I've just highlighted. So please, Andras, join me on stage. Okay. Andras, I know you've prepared a presentation to give some input for the delegates, but before we start with your presentation, I have a very simple and still very complex question for you. You are the European youth researcher for the EU Youth Dialogue, 1 out of 2. So there's also Dan Moxon, who's not here in the conference. What does the youth researcher actually do in the EU Youth Dialogue?
Thank you very much for the question. Thank you very much for the question. Yes, that's a baffling thing to explain, I would say. Researcher, what does a researcher do in terms of youth dialogue? What we researchers tend to do is to do research, and research, very smart, right? Starting well. And research includes not only collecting the data and analyzing data and working with the data, but also preparing methodology. And that is actually the expertise that me and Dan Moxon are offering in here within the scope of the EU Youth Dialogue and also within the scope of the EU Youth Conferences, is to help all of your voices to get heard, to be heard, and to be heard on an equal footing.
So it is actually a quite important role you have. You are doing some sort of the translations. We will talk more about the details, what you actually will do in this cycle. But you also do bring a lot of expertise to the cycle. You've been to so many conferences, I can't even count them. So it's great to have you again with us in the process. And I will now hand over the stage to you to introduce us to the cycle and the objectives of the conference.
Thank you very much, Clara. Well, it's great to be here with all of you. Welcome also from me. As it's already been mentioned, I mean, my name is Ondřej, which is kind of hard to pronounce, so most of my friends would call me Ondras, which is much easier to pronounce. And I'm here today to talk to you also on behalf of Dan Moxon, who is my colleague and dear friend, who is not here with us, who's got other obligations elsewhere, but who is also supporting you remotely through providing some different toolkits and other initiatives. And I'm here a bit to talk about how the EU Youth Dialogue, because we have heard a lot during this morning about the EU Youth Dialogue, its history and its role and the whole cycle and how it works or how it should work. And I'm here to explain a bit about how it relates to this particular conference. So how to get from actually the EU Youth Dialogue to the EU Youth Conference and not lose yourself on the way. So first, I mean, we already talked about it a bit, but who am I? So Ondřej, that's the weird character over there that is in the middle of my name, and that's the reason why I prefer Ondras, because I still insist that it's easier. I am a youth researcher, and I focus on the different fields such as youth participation, learning, mobility, sustainability, volunteering, and many others. And the common ground always is young people. I'm really interested in how young people cope with this and that and just generally perform in different areas. But also what I do is I do consultancy, and that is more related to the methodology that I mentioned already earlier. And that is also the role in which I am trying to support you in here at the Youth Conference and also throughout the Youth Dialogue, is how to hear young people all around the EU and how to make that voice heard also beyond these rooms. So, because you have heard very little about this, what is the EU Youth Dialogue cycle number 10 about? We already heard about the European Youth Goals. European Youth Goals stemmed from this very process from the EU Youth Dialogue in 2017-18. And one of the European youth goals, and since it became part of the current EU youth strategy, one of the European youth goals is the European youth goal number 3, to enable and ensure inclusion of all young people in society. And the current trial presidency is trying to pursue, in particular, 3 of these sub-goals. Sub-goal or targets, target number 3, to ensure that all marginalized young people have equal access to formal and non-formal learning environments, addressing all the dimensions of inclusion. Target number 4, to strengthen the capacities of educators to work with marginalized young people. And target number 6, to strengthen social support by implementing the right to living wage, fair work conditions, universal access to quality healthcare, and ensure specific measures for marginalized young people. So you see that the area is quite wide as to when it comes to the topic of what we will be discussing in here. There is this key word, the buzzword, that has been flying around quite a lot during this morning and even in the preparatory materials and all these documents. So, inclusion. What it is, it's already been mentioned in here by the panelists that there are different national contexts, there's different policy domains, and when it comes to inclusion especially, there you would find a gazillion of different definitions as to what it really is. This is a definition we have used. It's based on the EU COE Youth Partnership Glossary definitions, and it basically says that inclusion expresses the idea that all people living in a given society should have access and participation rights on equal terms. And what that refers to is access and participation rights to all domains of society. So it's not only about participation, it's not only about education, but it's also about mental health that we have heard earlier. It's also about employment, so all the sectors of society. What it basically means, I mean, to be included means that you are on equal footing with everyone else and you have the same chance to participate in the life of society just like everyone else. So that's just to give you a brief idea as to what the inclusion is in our minds, and I'm pretty sure that you will be debating it in a lot more detail in the working groups which will come later on. Now, this is the 10th cycle of the EU Youth Dialogue. You have heard about it. It's woo-woo. Number 10 is a popular number, so why not? And as the 10th cycle is only just starting, we are now in the Spanish presidency period, which is kind of defining, or which is kind of defined by being in the consultation phase. What it means is that first, we need to ask young people what they think about the target topic, in this case, the inclusion. And then we will get to the Belgian and the Hungarian presidencies, which will focus more on the domain of implementation. And how this relates to and we have also, and some of you may know, because I'm pretty sure that you were very thoroughly briefed by your national working groups before you came here, so you know that there is a toolkit which is supporting the national consultation processes. And why I am mentioning this is because this relates absolutely very closely to what we are doing in here. So what we are doing in here is, at the EU Youth Conference in Alicante, we are actually trying to implement a major level consultation event. So what we will do in here is that we will focus on the topic at hand, and we will give all of you as the youth delegates, all of you as experts on the lives of young people, the chance to actually come up with answers, with measures, with ideas, with suggestions. How will we do that? We will do that through working groups. You have seen the agenda. There is a wonderful app that we have at hand from our wonderful colleagues that you can just click, and with one click you can see all the agenda over there, so you know that there's lots of space devoted to the working groups. The working groups, as the title suggests, is that you will group yourself into smaller groups and you will be working in those. Why we do that is because it's rather hard to communicate stuff in this setting where there's 200 people over there and one person speaking in here. So you will have lots more space and time to work together in a smaller setting. what will you be discussing in the working groups? There are 3 guiding questions which have been already communicated to the national working groups and which have been already prepared. First of them is the question focusing on barriers. What are the current barriers to the full inclusion of all young people in society, especially young people with fewer opportunities? So focusing on what would be the obstacles we need to overcome, to identify what is the walls that we need to climb first. The second guiding question focuses on current support. So what sort of effective support is currently being given to enable the full inclusion of all young people in society, especially young people with fewer opportunities? So in this case, we focus on what already exists. What is perhaps the good practice examples? What is the measures that we would really like to highlight that these are helping us to support young people all around Europe in being included in society? And the third guiding question is focusing on the changes that are needed in the domain of inclusion. So what further actions need to be taken to enable the inclusion of all young people in society, especially young people with fewer opportunities? So here we look more toward the future, and we are orienting ourselves toward suggesting the new ideas, the new changes that are needed in order to be living in more inclusive societies. How do we do it? We do it through deliberation, conversation, dialogue, conclusions. So you will have 1.5 days to sit together, meet your colleagues, your friends from other countries in Europe, and to actually talk about these guiding questions and to share what is happening in the different corners of Europe, and to come up and to get to conclusions. And you will be supported by facilitators and harvesters. Facilitators will be focusing more on the group dynamics and how you progress from one topic to the other. And the harvesters will be there with you to take note of the ideas that are actually occurring in the working groups, to put them together and to create the final outcome, which will then be presented at the end of the conference. And you will also have experts at your disposal, because as you might have noticed in the program, one of the working group sessions is actually with experts. So you will have a chance to kind of sit with experts and reflect on what your ideas have been so far, and to see how realistic they are, if they perhaps are already happening somewhere else, and so on and so forth. What you will be getting to is to create working group conclusions. Working group conclusions will be short statements which will relate to the guiding questions that we have heard, and these statements will be taken verbatim and word by word, and they will be taken to the conference report and to the consultation report. This may not look like much, but this is actually a big step, because traditionally what is happening is that the consultations happen on the national level, and then national working groups report the consultation reports, and those are summarized for the European steering group. And those are then taken on board by various policy initiatives. Now this conference has a chance to actually be on equal footing with the national working groups, focusing on the European level, on the European dimension, on the dialogue that happens in here at the conference. You have a chance to have your outcomes also reflected in the consultation report. Are you excited? You should be. Good, good.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Andres, for that introduction to the youth dialogue. I have to say, I have 2 questions for you. So one is a surprise question, the other one, we talked about it earlier. Why do we talk so much about what the EU Youth Dialogue is? I'm a huge EU Youth Dialogue nerd and fan, to be honest. I've even written my thesis about inclusion of young people with few opportunities within the EU Youth Dialogue. And the problem with the EU Youth Dialogue is that it's so complex, it's very difficult to grasp to people, and it's even more difficult to explain it. So big props to you of explaining or summarizing the whole process. But my question goes in regards to expectation management. What can the EU Youth Dialogue do and what it cannot do? What's the power of the EU Youth Dialogue and what's its biggest weakness? You've been involved in the dialogue for quite some time, so can you share an insight on that with the delegates, just to already start with the expectation management of the cycle?
Thank you very much for that question. I think that is really important for all of us to know what we kind of can see coming and what is super unrealistic. So I will start with the super unrealistic. When we're leaving Alicante on Wednesday, Thursday, or some of you perhaps on Sunday if you just decide to stay a bit longer, I wouldn't blame you. I mean, the weather is just beautiful. So what is not going to happen is that the world will not shift. I mean, the EU will not just start talking about what we talked in here, and the American president will not come congratulate you. That is simply just not going to happen. And that is not the point. That is not the aim that we are here to achieve. What will happen, nevertheless, is that all of those ideas will be taken forward in a democratic way, in democratic processes, and they will contribute to democratic policies. And I think that is something that we can expect, should expect, and be really proud of, that it's possible for us to do. Because just think about it. We are in here, gathered in this room, and then you will be working in the working groups, and you are actually creating outcomes which then policymakers really will read and take into account. And I think that is really something. So a huge major shift and disappearing the moon? No. But slow democratic process? Absolutely yes. And this also links to the questions, to the second part of the question, the biggest weaknesses and the biggest strength of the EU Youth Dialogue. And I will start with the weaknesses again, and it's the transparency. The EU Youth Dialogue has been good at reaching certain objectives. There were some speakers before me, they mentioned initiatives which are now in place and which have stemmed from this very EU Youth Dialogue, such as the European Youth Goals. But I feel that the transparency behind the process and also how young people are informed of what is happening, that is still, I mean, there is room for improvement, definitely. So that for me would be the weakness. And the biggest strength is all of you. You coming here, giving the energy, giving the insights, giving your expertise on how young people can make a world a better place. I think that's just the biggest strength.
And what we can also see is really that it takes time. I mean, Nicholas has raised that there are some initiatives that arise out of the dialogue that happened during the conferences, but of course also during the overall dialogue. But then the impacts were actually only put in place years later. So be aware that we are right now in a very sustainable, hopefully very sustainable process where we maybe won't see immediate changes, immediate actions, but in the long term, we will probably or hopefully look back and say, yes, we actually contributed to these discussions. So again, if you are lost at some time in the EU Youth Dialogue, please reach out. Andras is going to be here all through the conference. Ask him, talk to the people who are experienced, because the EU Youth Dialogue is a very complex mechanism. We know that. My last question would be the same as I posed to the panelists. Do you have a tip for the delegates for their working group session? Anything you would like to share with them on how they can focus their discussion? Because we've heard inclusion is such a huge topic. So how to focus, how to prioritize in the working groups?
Well, I would say start with sharing. Find out what you have in common. Find out what the gaps are, what you are not talking about, what you don't know about, and then use those to your advantage. And again, start with your strength, start with what you really are as a group kind of experts on, and then slowly walk your way or work your way towards those gaps and try to also address them as well, because sometimes the gaps are actually what tells us even more than what we already know.
Yes. And of course, this cycle is also about looking back, gathering feedback. So if you do have feedback, also reach out to us as organizing team and share your feedback with us so that we can improve over the next cycle, or let's say cycles, because hopefully the Youth Dialogue is going to continue for some more years. Thank you very much, Andras, for this introduction.
Thank you for having me.
Kova, come back, join me on stage. We know there's been a lot of input, and I promised you there will be a change in the program now. So before we head to lunch break and you get the break you deserve after getting all this information, we want to take a brief look into the program to let you know what's going to happen today in the afternoon, but also during the next conference days. So I think we have some slides, and I do have the clicker. And I would ask you, Kova, what's happening today in the afternoon?
Okay, so as Andres just introduced to all of you, this afternoon will be dedicated to the first of the working group sessions. You will be working with our delightful team of facilitators and harvesters. Please feel free to ask them whatever you think that might be useful for the dialogue. They will be able to create a safe space for you to exchange insightful opinions, and please enjoy the dialogue session. It will be the first one, and then there will be more to come in the rest of the days.
Yes. So on Tuesday morning, we will continue with the working group sessions. This means we will not meet in plenary in the morning, but you will head directly back into your working groups in the rooms which you will get to know after lunch break. And at 12, there will be experts joining you, and we've already met Nadia from SOS Children Villages. We also have other NGOs. Of course, you also have the INGOs as experts in your working groups, and the ministerial delegates who also bringing expertise. But this is a session where outsiders, people who have not been discussing at this conference, will be there to provide feedback and to dive into dialogue with you, to look at what you've been discussing and where there are maybe gaps or where they can feed in something. So this is a feedback moment for you, from outside experts. And after lunch break and after your final working group session, we will have a moment where we share the overall conclusions. So you will, or some of you will come on stage, or at least in front of the room, to present and share your outcomes from the working groups, a brief summary so that we know what has happened during the conference. And there's actually a fourth guiding question, a bonus question. And that one tackles the role of the youth field in the discussion. So it's kind of an overarching question. And we will discuss that question here in plenary together. So there will also be a dynamic, interactive session during Tuesday afternoon. And then we go to the Wednesday.
So for Wednesday, you will have this dialogue session with people from the DGs and the conference delegates. You will together discuss these outcomes of the conference, and will be more like a closing day for us, just to summarize everything that you have learned and discussed during the past days.
And you can see that the dialogue with the DGs is actually 2 hours long, so it's quite an extensive session where we also have a dynamic format where really you can also shape as delegates the dialogue you would like to have with the DGs. And they will also join us, I believe, for the coffee break and for the lunch break later on, so maybe you can even catch them in some informal settings to discuss more with them about the conference outcomes. But not just work, we also do have some fun. What about the informal program?
Okay, so again, this sounds like a lot of work, and we are aware of that. But as we said at the very beginning of the conference, you will have some time to enjoy the beautiful city of Alicante. And as we are in Spain, the first thing that we will do in kind of informal activities today, it's a very Spanish thing actually, that is a tapas tour. It will work in the same way than a pub crawl. We will give you more information on this later on, but this will be a really nice activity because you will get to know the city at the same time that you enjoy the tapas tour together with our colleagues from Acciona that will be guiding us on this lovely activity. And tomorrow we will have dinner at Castillo de Santa Bárbara. That is a beautiful place as well. And we will have a cocktail dinner there, similar to yesterday's. For those who were in there, it was very nice, but it's a different place. So you will get to know different places on the cities, apart from the time that you have free, that we really encourage you to enjoy the amazing beach we have just in front of the hotel.
And of course, also between the official conference program and the evening programs, there's always some time, some gaps for you to take a rest, to go to the beach, to have a swim, to go to the pool, whatever you feel like. The conference is going to be quite intense, so we also want you to take care, use the breaks to actually have a break. Just be mindful for yourself and don't just do a very hard work throughout the days. So, talking about breaks, I believe that's it for the conference program. Kova, do we have any other organizational information we need to share right now?
No, so the only thing we need to, this is important if you want to have lunch, so please listen to me. We will give you now the information of where lunch will be served. This will be just next to the place where you had the coffee break, so again, next to the plaza space, up in the E, you know, the E floor, a little bit up on here, and the lunch will be served right on the right side of the coffee break area. It will be buffet style, so we really hope you enjoy. And the best part of the lunch portion is the views. So we really think that you will enjoy. And we need you to be back here at 2:30 to start working about the working group sessions and how they will be organized. Okay? So thank you so much and see you soon.
Enjoy your lunch.